I select the place where I want to start, which is up here at the head, and I'm looking at my reference, identifying the negative shape, the negative space, not getting too caught up in specific detailed curvatures that are too precise. I'm actually making markers here that will help me get a clue on how to read and place the other shapes. And ideally, that's all you want to be thinking in terms of shapes. Shapes and where and how those shapes relate to the other parts or the other shapes. It is tricky because our brain really just says, hey, I solved this puzzle. I know what it looks like. So let me just fill in the gaps. You have to have that patience to really sink in and follow the contours by simplifying what you see. And actually, I think that's too much time. But hey, you know, there's time for play, so we'll play just a little more. And because we've been getting so good at these 30-second, 1 minute, this felt like it was way longer. But this is the time we're going to be spending on it. So I just, you know, add a little extra, not that we have to, pretty much focusing on what it is I need to, which is how accurate were my reading of the angles and the shapes. Okay, we're going to keep moving along. So that was 2 minutes. And just so you know, we are going to come back again and develop these even further. So here we are. Another interesting full figure profile for the head and the face. We recognize it. And I'm going to maybe test out different technique here where I can try to get a sense of the proportion first by simplifying and generalizing some of these lines. Almost blind contour as well. And I can get a little bit better read of how we did before with the joints, what would be the read for the shoulders. And now I can begin to set up and identify my negative space. Starting here at the top, I have a good sense. I want to make sure that my head is not leaning back, leaning forward. It is accurate. And I'm not getting too caught up in a lot of these folds and, you know, what would be sort of like the sweater. Some of the major ones, yes, they'll be in here. And I'm pretty much sticking to the 100% blind drawing. Actually, 99, 98%. I take a peek once I'm reaching areas just to see that my lines are not getting longer and out of proportion. Here, I'm really just going with 100%. Again, these are, think of them as warm-up drawings. But you'll be amazed at how, if you remember what we did the previous 2 weeks, how we're moving now to something that's more day-to-day, realistic in a way of what we see, what we actually would see and would draw if we were, say, urban sketching or and that's it. So what we're doing is, and that took very close to the full 2 minutes. So I did lose track a little bit of my thought process. But the idea here is for you to find which is the one that makes it easier for you to see it and to draw it. Now this one I'm going to do half page, reset that clock. And for this one, I'm just going to go 100% negative space, blind contour, and see how we do it. So I'm getting a first a relationship of how it's going to fit on my paper. So I'm looking at the top of the head, back, bottom, feet. And I'm just making quick markers so I stay within this range here. And I could start literally anywhere. Some of these shapes would be much easier for a read. And again, with more time, I might approach this a little different, because once we get caught up in all, like for example, all of these details here in the face, and they are subtle lines, I want to make sure I have the general angle and specifics and how they relate to each other done with a little more care. So for example, this is a beautiful, interesting shape, and we'll see more and more of them, which could make or break your drawing. How these two shapes here relate. And again, our brain knows and interprets and says, I know what that is. But we need to push and focus. There we go. And I got to be honest, because scientifically they say that we are using, if you're using these negative space approaches, you are forcing the right hemisphere of your brain to activate, to read the space, to begin to see the differences between what is subject and the space it occupies. It is harder when you're talking, because the act of language is forcing the left brain to take over. So hopefully I'm not distracting you too much from it. But overall, notice how these elements that I'm highlighting here could pretty much resolve everything. And just with a little more emphasis here and there, just beginning to put these together then allows you to put everything else in place. So I hope you can see it. If you're seeing it easy, then obviously we're going to add more detail to it. All right, let's go to the next one. Now, I'm going to give you a quick little, let's call it a cheat, a sneak peek, which is this one. Try to see the red shapes and try to draw them. Now, I don't want to just leave them on there, but you know what? For this first one, let's go ahead and just leave it there. So when you get in that moment of, okay, I'm, let's say, near or around the legs, instead of thinking I'm going to draw the legs, draw the red shapes. Focus, push yourself to focus on those elements. And remember, we're trying not to identify or use. This one might be a little tricky because it's going to be a lot shorter. So I have to make it smaller. But again, I'll use some of these simplified. More geometric lines before I come in. And I just want to make sure it fits. So it does. I think I have again, notice that I just went all the way around with that negative space, read. And some may say, how do you make the difference? Well, I'm looking at both, but my focus is on the space. Now that I have a general sense, I can really focus, for example, right here on drawing that red kind of pyramid type looking thing. And just getting your brain to focus on exactly what is there. Once we reach, for example, this bottom edge, I don't have to do this side of it. It's just really beginning to see shapes and contours so you can identify if you're reading the angles of those lines correctly. So if I look at this shape, and I'm going to color it in, I can see how close I am in terms of, was this supposed to be a little more angular? Yes, it was. So this angle, for example, I was off. Now that might push this a little further out, and you can begin to put it all together much, much easier. So here I have this nice little shape that takes me in and out. Go straight up, and oop, there goes time. So again, it's beginning to give yourself a method, beginning to develop your own method of how you can see all of these little things easier. And notice I just taken a couple extra seconds here so you can see that once I fill this in and I compare to what I did on screen, I can actually see, okay, it is much easier if I look for these clues and then put them together.